Molly Rosenblum, family law attorney, fierce advocate, and the one you want in your corner when it all hits the fan. Each week, we'll break down the legal, the emotional, and the unexpected so you can take back control. Because smart decisions start with straight answers.
Welcome back to The Difficult Divorce. My name is Anthony, and I'm joined here today with Nevada divorce attorney Molly Rosenblum. Today's question is one that we're excited to talk about and that we hear our clients ask constantly. How long does a divorce take in Nevada? So let's get right into it. Hi, Molly.
Hey, Anthony. It's so great to be back here on The Difficult Divorce. And yeah, I'm super excited to talk about this topic, about how long it takes to get a divorce. And so really when we're talking about that and how long it takes, what we're talking about is dependent on cooperation, complexity, and the court's calendar, to be honest. So usually when we're looking or answering the question about how long is this going to take me, we usually try to separate this into three buckets. The first being an uncontested bucket, the second would be contested, and then the third would be a high conflict custody or business type of case where you've got significant assets. So usually we're looking at those three buckets, and depending on what kind of bucket your case fits into will depend on how long your case will take. Now, I promise I will actually give you some realistic ranges and some levers that you can control depending on the type of case you have.
Well, if we've got three different buckets to look at, we can look at those individually. So let's start off with, what does an uncontested timeline look like?
Sure. So let's talk about an uncontested timeline. So in the uncontested timeline, it really can go very quickly, just depending on how fast everyone signs everything. I think the fastest uncontested case that we had took about 7 hours from the time we filed the paperwork to the time the parties were divorced. So it can go super quick. 7 hours is pretty much unheard of. I do think that's one of the fastest that we've had. But usually in an uncontested case, it can take a couple days or even a couple weeks, sometimes a couple months, depending on the agreements regarding property, debts, custody, visitation, support, how assets are going to get divided up. So what can speed that timeline up is really getting documents prepared, having those conversations with your spouse early, and getting on the same page so that there's no surprises. And so when we take in an uncontested case, usually we leave the consultation and our clients have some worksheets that we ask them to fill out. That helps us get the paperwork prepared faster. And we ask them to take that paperwork and share it with their spouse so that they can sit down and work on those worksheets together and talk about how to divide things up and what their custody and parenting plans are going to look like.
Okay, so uncontested divorce, spouses are able to work together and be level-headed, which can make that process go faster and smoother. That makes total sense. But what turns a normal divorce into a long divorce?
Yeah, so what we would classify as a normal or routine divorce can become a long and drawn-out divorce for a lot of different reasons. So the first reason would be service. We have to get the other party served. At least in the state of Nevada, they have to be personally served. So that means that they have to be handed paperwork by a process server. And it doesn't matter if they live here in Las Vegas or they live somewhere else. If we have an out-of-state service, they still have to be handed that paperwork by a process server. So if we have someone who is hiding or trying to avoid service, that process can take longer and can drag the process of divorce out, because we would have to do a skip trace, which means we have to search a bunch of databases to see if we can find updated addresses. If we do find updated addresses, we may have to try to personally serve there. And if we can't find an updated address or can't get them served, then we have to go through what's called a due diligence period. And that can mean mailing it. It can mean trying to find them on social media and get them served that way. So definitely service avoidance can drag a case out into several weeks, if not several months. So that's one reason a case can continue for a super long time.
And occasionally that can sometimes look like the movies. But like, I remember we had a case where our process server was on the way to the party's house and then got updated information that he was leaving to go to work. And so I remember that because the process server was like, okay, well, where does he work? And then he turned around and he drove to the guy's, place of business and served him there. So it can sometimes look like the movies, but excuse me, please continue.
The second thing that would draw out routine, or typically draws out routine divorces, is fighting over kids and custody. So in our jurisdiction, the court will order the parents to go to mediation. Sometimes that happens at the first hearing. Sometimes it happens before the first hearing. And so you're waiting for that first hearing. That can take a couple of weeks, if not several months, to get that first hearing done. Then you get ordered to mediation. If you cannot resolve your custody issues in mediation, you may have to go back to court. If you still can't resolve the custody issues, there may be discovery done about your children, which can include having custody evaluations or child interviews. And so all of that stuff takes time and is a process. And so that can turn a normal or routine divorce into something that can take a little longer.
I mean, custody can always get messy, and for good reason. I mean, people are willing to fight tooth and nail for their kids, but please go on.
So the third thing that can cause a divorce to go on longer than it probably needs to is discovery. So discovery is a period where we are trying to get information from the opposing party and they are trying to get information from us. And in our jurisdiction, the court requires us to turn over certain documents. That doesn't always happen. So not everybody has access to all of their credit card statements, for example, or all of their tax returns. And so ordering those things, getting them from the bank, figuring out if there's missing accounts or accounts you just might have forgotten about. That takes time, and that can drag on a case even longer than it needs to be. So again, that's where being organized and having all of your documents up front and understanding your universe of assets and debts can be super helpful and help speed up the process.
I'm not even sure I know where to find all my financial information, so I can totally understand how that would be hard for individuals to, accumulate all of that beforehand, let alone even during discovery.
Another big one is that business valuation issue. Business valuations tend to take a while because your expert is looking at years and years worth of financial records. And for some businesses, people intermix their personal and their business. So separating out what's personal, what's business, and trying to really get a good value on the business, that can just take some time. So that's another reason that a routine divorce, if a business is involved, can take a little longer than just that routine time frame.
I remember one case where our client had a couple businesses, and we had to call in expert witnesses to testify about how much those businesses were worth. But luckily, I think in that case, it settled right before it was set to go to trial, like in the courtroom. But what about people who, try to drag the case on?
And yes, I have had clients try to delay a case or avoid a divorce and delay as a way to get leverage, telling their spouse, I'm going to make this go on forever. I'm going to delay this as long as I can so that you get nothing. We've heard those threats routinely for 20 plus years. At some point, usually the rubber meets the road, the judge gets involved and they cut the bleeding, so to speak, and they make a case go forward to divorce. So judges don't like, especially when one party is trying to delay a case or extend a case to get leverage over another party.
That seems very resentful and costly. I'm sure a judge would notice that. But let's move on. For my next question, I want to ask, what can somebody do in the first 30 days to make it faster and cheaper?
Yeah, I really like this question because I try to give people tips when they come in and see us about how to make it go faster or how to make it cheaper. So always having that conversation with your spouse, even though it may be an uncomfortable one, talking about, hey, look, we're going to get divorced. We need to divide up our assets and debts. We need to figure out a plan for our kids. If you have those conversations early, even before you hire an attorney, it can definitely make it faster, cheaper, easier, calmer, all the things you want it to be. Even though divorce is super unpleasant, having that early conversation, getting that done early and being on the same page about how you're going to divorce can definitely cut down the amount of time that it will take to go through the process.
So have the uncomfortable conversation if you're able to. Please go on.
So quickly, just a couple other things that can help if you end up in a contested divorce. Number one, draft out your own parenting plan. Figure out what schedule works for you, what you're willing to propose, what you calculate child support to be, what you think a good holiday schedule is. Those things can help your lawyer up front if you're in a contested divorce, kind of understand where you're coming from and have the conversations about what's reasonable, what's not, what's likely to happen, and what's not likely to happen, so that you and your lawyer are on the same page. If you have to go to contested hearings, it's already mapped out. The second thing you can do, get your documents, get them early. Pay stubs, tax returns, bank and credit card statements, retirement statements, mortgages, loan documents, car statements. All of those things will help your lawyer get super organized and have all that information right up front, so there's no hiding the ball and you can just keep moving towards the finish line. The other thing that should be considered early on is mediation. So like I mentioned, the court may order mediation regarding custody issues, but if you really want to get this thing settled and get it resolved and not wait a year or 2 years or 5 years to get divorced, and yes, you can wait that long, mediation is always something that should be on the table and should be considered early to get a case resolved and end the process.
I mean, in that same vein, I believe I've also heard you say, communicate like a judge is watching. And that recently happened in one of our custody cases, that the opposing party was using a court-ordered communication app to talk to our client and was slandering our client through it. That really didn't look good to the judge. But continuing on, when should somebody worry that delay is a strategy?
So this usually comes up when a person doesn't want the divorce, period. And in our jurisdiction, Nevada is a no-fault divorce state. I think you've heard me say that probably a million times on this podcast by now. So divorce is inevitable here. The court isn't going to order counseling. It's not going to make parties stay together. So usually we see delay as a strategy when the other side is just not wanting to divorce. And you start to worry about that when they're not getting documents, they're not showing up to court, they're refusing to come to agreements, they're dragging out service, they're hiding, they're trying to hide assets. And that's when you have to rely on your attorneys to pivot, go to the court, file motions, and get your case moving. And in our jurisdiction, there are sanctions that can be entered against somebody who really just isn't participating in the case. That can end up being what are called case concluding sanctions. So if somebody really delays, hides the ball, isn't participating, your lawyer or you can go to the court and say, hey, look, this person is just delaying this thing and I want case concluding sanctions and I want the court to make decisions in my favor because they're not going to participate and they're not going to give the information. And that's how you can end the case like that.
So occasionally it seems like the opposite party delaying the case could work out in your favor. All right, so realistically, what should somebody expect for an uncontested case?
So I did promise at the beginning that I would give some estimates on answering the question, how long is this going to take? An uncontested case, so one where you and your spouse agree and you've agreed on everything, like I said at the beginning, we've had them come back as quick as 7 hours from the time we filed to the time the parties are divorced. But usually those cases, I try to tell people it's anywhere from, 2 weeks to about 21 days, 3 weeks. It just depends on the judge, really, in an uncontested case. So once everything's agreed and all the paperwork is filled out and completed, the order gets submitted to the judge. Unfortunately, as lawyers, we don't have authority or control over the court. And so however long it takes the judge to sign your paperwork is really up to the judge. Sometimes they do it within a couple days or a couple hours, but most of the time it's usually about a week, 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks at the outside.
If that's the case I'm thinking about with that 7-hour time frame, I think the clients came in during the morning, signed all the paperwork, and then we gave them whiplash for how quickly they got divorced. And if it is that case, I think we gave them the weekend or something to recover from that whiplash, and then they came back in on Monday to finalize everything or something along those lines. But yeah, that one was a rarity. Now, what should somebody expect for a normal divorce?
Okay, so for a routine divorce case in Nevada where we don't have all of these crazy issues, maybe there's just some custody issues or a house or a couple of assets that need to be resolved. Those cases from beginning to end usually take about 6 months to a year. And again, I put that time frame in because it really depends on the judge. So again, as lawyers, as litigants, we are subject to the court schedule. We have no control over how quickly or how soon, how long it's going to take them to set a case for a trial. So if you start a case and your ex is being difficult and you can't settle anything and you have to go all the way through a trial, I would tell you a routine case can take up to a year usually. And again, that just depends on the judge. That depends on how organized everybody is. And just that routine kind of normal course is how lawyers will refer to that. So normal course can be up to a year.
Gotcha. And finally, what should somebody expect for your contested and difficult divorce?
Okay, so for the complex, highly contested, lots of assets, businesses, maybe some parental alienation issues or custody valuations and child interviews, relocation cases, those would be what we would refer to as our more complex cases. For those cases, usually about a year to 18 months, but I have had cases go on for 2 years or even longer before we could get the parties to a trial and get them divorced because of the complexity of the case. So a lot of the time that is dependent on the court schedule because you're going to need several days for trial, and on experts because you're waiting on reports, you're waiting for them to get information. So again, like we talked about at the beginning, getting all that information to your experts up front as quickly as you can, making sure everything's complete, that they have all of the access that they need, that is really going to set that timeline.
Got it. So if you're listening and you want the quickest path, Molly, what's the takeaway?
The key takeaway here is that your divorce moves at the speed of cooperation and information. So the sooner you get organized, get a plan, the faster and less expensive it's going to be. And I'll put an asterisk on that. It's always dependent on the judge if you have to go to trial. But if you can control the information and get everything organized, that is going to move your case along much faster and much cheaper.
So it sounds like in a perfect world, we'd be able to tell you exactly how long this would take. But the reality is it's based on a lot of complex factors. Cooperation, judge discretion, if you have children, if you're planning on moving out of state, if there's any resentment or delays, or if you're both willing to work along the way. Divorce is tough, but it can go more smoothly with the right attorney by your side. Thank you, Molly, for being here once again. Remember to like, subscribe, and share this with somebody you think might need it. Thank you for listening to The Difficult Divorce.
You've been listening to The Difficult Divorce. Follow, review, and share if this helped cut through the noise. Find more tools and real talk on our website at rosenblumlawlv.com. And be sure to tune back in for the next episode. Because in divorce, what you don't know will cost you.